Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn here with a wiring and setup guide on Corsair's IQ Link's RX Max fans. These are non-RGB fans with superb cooling performance and a really nice style to them, and I'm going to show you how to set them up and to wire them into your system. You can see them here inside the Corsair Frame 4000D, and I'll talk about the logic of how to install them, how to connect them up, and how to mix and match 140mm and 120mm in the system, how to connect them to your motherboard, the wires that you need to plug in, the things you need to know about power supply unit capabilities, and plugging that in to the controller because it does need powering, and how to swap the all-in-one cooler fans on your radiator for the RX Max fans to improve cooling performance potentially, either on a Corsair IQ Link radiator or on a separate one on another brand's cooler. You can do this logic, and I'm going to show you how to set that up and how to tweak the settings in IQ so that you can control the fans based on the temperature of different things in your system, whether it's CPU or GPU, for example. You can see me top mounting the radiator here with exhaust setup. I'm also going to show you how you might want to intake with the radiator, for example, and I'll show you the setup there. So quite a lot of logic here to go through, but as said, I'm going to show you the RX140 Max fans and the RX120 Max fans in this guide as well, and talk to you about the difference between them. Luckily, the similarities make it very easy to set up these fans, no matter which you choose to put in your case. So we'll look at the RX120 Max fans to start with. It's important to know what's going on here inside the box. So if you buy a triple pack of these fans, it's very important that you have at least one triple pack because you get the controller and a lot of cables included in there, as you can see laid out here, and then obviously additional screws and other things. Now the good thing about these fans, obviously with the IQ Link setup, is they're interlocking fans and really easy to install. These fans also have a sensor on them as well, a temperature sensor, and they are interesting in that they're thicker than a lot of other fans out there, meaning they potentially give you better cooling performance as well. For the setup of IQ Link fans, you need to use the IQ Link controller, which you can see here. Now this thing will control up to 24 different devices. That's 24 fans potentially, or think about the AIO as being one device, and you'll see two ports on either side of it. In the triple pack box, you get that and a lot of screws because you get additional radiator screws and fan screws and other things. So you can see those laid out here. These are longer radiator screws than you'd normally get. So if you want to do what I'm doing, which is swapping out the fans on your radiator for these fans, then you can make use of these longer screws. So you can see you get two lots, some that are threaded all the way through and some that have threads just on the end. You have the option to use either of these to install the fans on the radiator, and I'll talk more about that later on, but it is essential to use those because of the depth of the fans. On the fans, you'll see there are markings to show you which way the airflow is going, and you also have these little plastic clips that go into the connector port at the top there that actually has the little connector in it, and then another one that goes down the bottom and notches into there. Once you've done that, you can then connect the next fan in the sequence to this first fan. You need to make sure you line up the right parts, obviously, so the connector goes to the connector, and then the sort of blank hole that locks the other bit in place goes there. Now what you'll notice that these fans also are magnetic, and there's quite strong magnets in them, so they will snap together even without these interlocking bits, but they need those extra bits in order to make the connection and to work properly. So you need to make sure you put these plastic clips in place first of all, slot them into the right points on the fan so that you can then connect them up, and then that will send the signal through from one fan to the next. So one group of 3 fans is fairly straightforward to connect together and lock into place like this. And then obviously you'd install them into your case. But I want to show you the wiring logic for these fans so you get an idea of how they work and how to set them up in your system and the basics of it before you throw in all the different fans into your system. So in the triple pack, you get these additional cables included. You've got a short one, a long one, and a couple of cables that are used for the controller itself. So the idea here is that the long cable, you'd install that onto the fans, and then you'd run the other end of that through to the back of your case and plug it into the controller. Obviously, those 3 fans are connected up to that port on the left-hand side of the controller, and then you can then control those through IQ when you get to it. And that's fairly straightforward, but you do need to make sure you plug in these other cables. So you've got a USB cable and a power cable. The power cable is the one that might cause some complexity because it's basically a special adapter that plugs into here, as you can see on the left-hand side, and then it requires PCIe power. So it needs to plug into your graphics card cable, so the same cable you use for your GPU. And the other one is this USB connection, and the USB connection is required so that you can then control things in IQ software. And if you don't connect this up, then you just won't be able to, and obviously that wouldn't be good. So it's micro USB on one end that plugs into the controller, and then the other end is a USB cable that connects internally on the motherboard, and I'll show you where to plug that in a second. But at a minimum, you have these two cables. If you've got a Corsair IQ Link all-in-one cooler, then you might well have a third cable which plugs into the CPU fan header, and I'll show you that later on. Now, as I said, you need PCIe power cables. So those are the 8-pin power cables that you'd normally use for your GPU. You can see them here with the Corsair RM850X shift power supply unit. On one end marked Type 5, on the other end marked PCIe. It's a 6-pin and a 2-pin together. Normally you'd pinch those together and put them in your GPU. Now, hopefully with your power supply unit, you have several of these. This power supply, for example, has 3 of them, 2 standard ones and 1 pigtail cable. Obviously, you're going to be using a GPU in your build as well. You might well be using some of these cables for your graphics card. So you need to make sure you've got a spare one and a spare connector that you can use to then plug in the IQ Link controller and make sure that's powered. So in theory, it's pretty straightforward and easy, depending on your graphics card. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. But generally speaking, you just need to make sure you've got one of these cables and then plug it into the PCIe/CPU ports on your power supply unit. So the Type 5 end plugs into this port, and you need to make sure it's pushed all the way in. So it's got a little plastic clip on it. Push it in until it clicks into place, and make sure you've got a cable dedicated to the IQ Link controller for this so that you've got a spare one. And then we're going to go about plugging it in. So at a basic level, we've got our 3 fans, we've got our controller cables plugged in, and then what we're going to do is power them up. So you just run that cable from the power supply unit and plug it in there. Now, this is an 8-pin cable usually, but obviously 6-pin and 2-pin you usually pinch together, but for the controller, you just need the 6-pin part of it. So you have this extra bit loose from the power supply cable, but not to worry about that. As long as it's pushed in and seated in there, clicked into place, you should be fine. Where you might have an issue is if you've got something like this, the Radeon 9070 XT, for example, which requires 3 power cables. So you can see this has got 3 ports on it for powering. That makes life a little bit complicated, as you can imagine, because I've shown you this power supply only has 3 cables, but one of them is a pigtail cable that you can see here. So what we could do instead is plug the first 2, the standard power supply cables, into the graphics card. And then the third one, you make the use of the pigtail bit. So you plug in one part of the cable into your graphics card, and then the other part of it can plug into the IQ Link controller. So you can power both the GPU and your IQ Link fans at the same time. Now, this might be messy because it probably means you're going to have the controller kind of nearby your GPU, which isn't ideal. So this is something to bear in mind. Larger power supplies with bigger wattage generally include more cables. That's a thing of note there. Now, the other thing is to plug in the USB cable from the controller to the USB port on your motherboard. Usually this is in the bottom middle. On most motherboards, you'll find it down the bottom. You'll usually see it marked USB. You should find a couple of them, and they're usually in the same place. As I say, bottom middle of the motherboard is usually where you'll find them. Sometimes there's only 1, sometimes there's 3, but usually there's 2 USB ports marked here, and you'll see it marked F USB 1 and 2 in this instance. So that's the basic setup for 3 fans. Now, obviously, we're going to put more into the system, including the RX140 Max fans, which, as you can see, the dual pack of includes the same sort of thing as the RX120. You've got the controller, you've got the clips for clipping the fans together, you've got the same cables, you've also got those longer radiator screws and the standard fan screws for installing the fans into your case as well. So it's the same logic, just 2 fans instead of 3, but obviously these are 140mm fans. Now, the thing here is, yes, you can put 140mm fans into the system, so you can plug those in and wire them in, so you can run the cables that I've just shown you, use the small cable from the 120mm fans to the 140mm fans, and they're still all connected, and they're still into that system. So it's really easy to do that with Corsair's setup there. No need to worry. And then those fans are then in there and logically connected. So now we've got 5 fans on one of the ports on the controller. It's worth noting that you can connect up to 12 devices per port on either side. So you've got 2 ports, maximum of 24 devices per controller. So you have options. You could continue adding to it, or if you've got another group of fans and you want to run a cable from those to the other side of the controller, you can do that. So now I've got 3 on one side, 5 on the other. You can do that, or you can keep chaining them together depending on your case and how you're building it and how easy it is to wire things in. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated, it's a bit difficult, but you can just use the longer cable that's included with the fans to run it through to the rear. Another thing you can do with these fans is to swap the fans on your radiator for them and upgrade the cooling performance. So here you can see I've got an H150i RGB IQ Link cooler, which has the QX fans as standard. These are obviously RGB fans and nice ones, but the RX Max are thicker. So what I'm going to do here is swap the standard fans for these new RX Max fans instead. Now, the logic here is that they're plugging into the radiator, but you could use the connections that I've shown you to plug them in on a different all-in-one cooler. You do, however, need to use the new radiator screws that are included with the fans because they are longer. So if you try to reuse the screws from the rad where you just remove those old fans, you'll find that they just won't screw in. So you need to use these longer ones in order to secure it. Now, I've installed these fans face towards me, so they'll be facing down into the case because it's going to be exhausting out of the top of the case, but you could set them up as intake, and I'll show you how I've done that later on as well. So we're going to install it into the top of the case, the same sort of logic as most people would install their radiator, and that is basically now going to be pretty easy to improve the cooling performance, but also to make sure the fans match throughout the case. Obviously, I've got IQ Link RX Max fans throughout and other places, so now I'm putting them onto the radiator. If you are going to swap it, I'd recommend refreshing your thermal paste at this point. So if you've been using a cooler for a while, you want to put RX Max fans on it, why not upgrade your thermal paste, clean off the previous thermal paste, put on some fresh paste just to make sure that's good, and then set it up and install it in the usual way. So installing the cooler on there. With a standard all-in-one cooler, not an IQ Link one, you'd obviously run a cable from the pump that we're just installing now to the CPU fan header or AIO pump header, and usually you'd connect the fans to the CPU fan header if that's spare. Obviously with IQ Link setup it's slightly different, so I'm going to show you the connections in IQ later on so that you can still control the fan speed based on CPU temperature. So stick with me for that, and I'll leave timestamps so you can jump to these points. But with IQ Link all-in-one coolers, you also get an additional small cable that plugs into the IQ Link controller. That then runs through to the front and plugs into the CPU fan header, so your motherboard doesn't complain about not seeing any CPU fan speed. Just as a reminder, obviously power from the power supply unit needs to plug into the controller as well, and you need to make sure you run that cable to the USB port on the motherboard. Now I've got the long cable here that I'm going to connect to the controller, and then you need to find a way to run that through your case and plug it into either the fans or the radiator, depending on how you connected things up. In my instance, for example, I'm running the cable through and plugging into the radiator because I've run the fans into the radiator as well. But if you're using separate fans on a different cooler, then obviously you'd be running this cable through to the fans itself and then chaining things together perhaps. So just plugging that small cable into the CPU fan header to make sure that that's connected up. This will ensure that your motherboard recognizes that there's something plugged into the CPU fan header and can communicate with the controller. So you're looking for the CPU fan header, which is usually on the top right. You might well find that your cooler alternatively plugs into the AIO pump header. Now I'm plugging that other cable into the radiator there, and then that's connected up. Now putting in additional fans into the system to show you what's what, obviously showing you the logic of how to connect them up. I'm putting intake fans onto the side of the case here. So these fans are facing outwards, pulling air through the side of the case. So we've got a nice lot of intake fans to go along with the front intake fans. Then I run a small cable from the fans on the radiator, so the connector on the other end plugs into there, and then that runs onto the intake fans that I've then got mounted to the side there. So then all of those things, all those fans are now connected up to that one port on the IQ Link controller. Alternatively, you might be doing something like this, throwing more fans into the system. So here you can see I've actually put the radiator as intake instead. I've side mounted that. I've got 3 intake fans on the front, 3 intake fans on the radiator, then 4 exhaust fans at the top and rear. So the way the wiring works here is the 3 fans on the front connect to the fans on the radiator, which then connect to the radiator and then connect to the 3 fans at the top. And they then run to one port on the controller, and the 140mm fan at the back, that runs to the other port on the controller. Now, in theory, you could wire all of these things together as long as you don't have more than 12 devices, but this is the way I did it in this case, so I could set it up. Now, when you're in Windows, you need to download and launch IQ, and as you can see, you might well get this notification that you need to update the firmware on the controller. I'd recommend this is the first thing you do, because this will ensure that all 12 devices on either port will work. So if you've got more than 7, this firmware update is required in order for things to be recognized properly. Now, this is an older version of IQ I'm running, and what I found is this was slightly problematic, so it was struggling to do the firmware update. I got multiple requirements of restarting IQ and other issues with it, and had problems with it. So I want to show you that in case you have the same issue, because it is a bit problematic. You need to be able to run the wizard in the IQ Link system hub so that it knows how many things are connected to the hub, and then you can set it up. But I was having problems with it, so if you're having the same problems, I'm going to show you a quick, simple tip for sorting it out. What you'll see if you go into the software update section is that the IQ Link software is out of date, and you'll see it's trying to download updates for it. However, it wouldn't work for me. It was being a problem. So what I'm going to do is show you the other thing that you can do, which is head over to the IQ website, so Corsair's website, and download the latest version manually. I would recommend doing this if you have any problems with IQ. Quite often, this is the easiest fix. Basically, yes, I am telling you to turn it off and on again. We're going to uninstall IQ as it is on the system and install the new version. So go to Add Remove Programs, find IQ as it is and uninstall it. This often works well, especially if you delete all the user settings and things in there. As you see, you have the option to, and then you'll be able to remove that from the system and get rid of any of the problems you might be having. Unfortunately, different versions of IQ can be problematic. It is good when it does work, but it can cause issues, so uninstalling and reinstalling often fixes that problem. So in this instance, I'm now just going to run the new version and reinstall it, and this will then help with the issues that I've been having, because we'll then be able to update the firmware. It's important you do that, because then that will ensure that all the fans are recognized, and we can then go about controlling them and setting them up in IQ. So you can see this is now downloaded that version. There are some firmware updates and other things that it needs to download, modules that it'll need to install, and eventually it'll ask you to restart your PC. Once you do that and then you get IQ launched again, you should see hopefully the fans are recognized, the hub's recognized, and more. You can run the wizard, which then will recognize the devices that are connected to it. This is pretty handy because it basically allows the device to pick up all the different things on there. So run that and you'll see the devices that have been detected and an order that IQ puts them in. However, this isn't quite right, and it's worth working out which fans are which. Now, what you'll see is when you hover over a fan, it says once you drag it, the fan will be stopped so that you can recognize which one it is. So if I grab fan 9, for example, and just hold on to it, eventually this fan on the radiator, the top one, just stops spinning. So you now know that this is fan 9. It's a bit weird the way that the logic works in IQ, as you'll see going through, but this is one way to establish which fan is where in the system, because you can basically just hold on to those fans and then they'll slow down. So that was fan 9. Now we get fan 8 and do the same thing. So just hold on to it with your mouse, maybe wiggle it around a bit, but you can see it got the little pause icon next to it to let you know that basically it is slowing down. So this gives you a clear indicator of that that's happening. And then have a look at your case, look in there and you'll see. So now the bottom fan on the radiator is stopped. So 8 and 9 are not next to each other, surprisingly. So despite the fact they're clipped together and wired in a logical way, actually the fans have ended up in a slightly different order in the system. Anyway, what I'd recommend is basically doing this throughout the case. So grab each of the fans individually, especially if you've filled up your case with the IQ Link fans, work out which one's which and where they are. This is worth doing because it will enable you to then be able to control the fan speed based on the temperatures. And I'll show you how to do that in a second, but you can see if I've shaken this fan around, it's now the top right one there because that's stopped, so we know where that fan is. And what I'm going to do is basically repeat this process so that I can then reorder the fans in a logical way in this list so it can work out where they are. Now, obviously, this is under the lighting setup tab, which doesn't make much sense when you've got non-RGB fans. There's no RGB to worry about apart from on the pump head itself. But using this tool enables you to just simply work out which fans are where in the system and then sort of plan it out in your head. So I know how I've wired the fans into the case at a hardware level. In the software, they look slightly different, so it's worth bearing in mind. Don't make an assumption of just because you've wired in the fans in a certain position, they'll appear in a certain position in the software, because that's not the case. Once that's done, if you click on the fans themselves, you'll see that you can then get into the cooling section, and from there you can adjust various different things. Now, on each of the fans individually, you can click the drop down and select between quiet, balanced, and extreme mode, or the one that relates to your cooler, so it's related to that IQ Link cooler, for example. You can also click on the 3-dot icon and you can rename the sensor so that you can name the fans, so that at a glance you can easily see what the fans are. So I know which fans are which now, for example. I've worked it out and I'm going to rename them logically so I can see easily that fan 1, for example, is an AIO fan, and then the other ones are fan 8. So we can just rename those, and fan 9, and I know now which one's which. So then I can adjust those specifically if my CPU temperature gets too hot and I want to change the settings on them. Now, obviously, you could set the whole lot to balanced. That would be nice and easy, but maybe you want to crank up the CPU fans to extreme mode for some reason. You can have the flexibility to be able to do that pretty easily here. Now, you also have the option to do a custom cooling preset, and you can base this on specific temperatures. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a custom preset for those fans on the radiator. So looking at the drop-down list, you can choose from the sensor for what temperature you want. So what I'm going to do here is grab the package temperature, which is the overall temperature of my Intel CPU in this system. So this temperature is what is being set now specifically for the fans to respond to. On the bottom right, underneath the graphs, you can then choose from quiet, balanced, extreme, or the custom settings where you can choose where the fans start to speed up. Obviously, just grabbing the little dots and moving them around. So you have the option to use presets or to customize it to your own personal preference and adjust it. So this is similar to the standard presets, but it just gives you a bit more flexibility to tweak it. Now, what I'm going to do is rename this preset as well. So I'm going to set this specifically to be about the AIO fans, so that I know it's for those specifically. And then you can go to the AIO fan drop down and you can see you can then set the AIO fans to that specific custom preset for the cooling that you've set up for them. So it's just easy to see your named fans at a glance and the cooling preset that you've got set for them. So this is the way that you would individually control the fans based on the temperature. Now, you can use a similar sort of logic for other devices in the case as well. So it's worth knowing if you're filling the case with these fans, you can obviously do that. What we can do on the lighting section as well is that you can rename the fans in there. So while you're establishing which fan is where in the case, you can go about renaming them there as well. So you're not just renaming the sensor, but you can also rename the fan itself. So I've gone through and I've renamed the AIO fans, and now I'm renaming the other ones. So the front intake fans are really obvious. It's obvious where those ones are and which ones are which, and the same for the exhaust fans. And basically just repeat this process until they're all named logically in a way that's useful. Now, the reason to do this is what you might want to do is to adjust the CPU fans on the radiator according to the CPU temperature. And then perhaps other fans might want to adjust based on something else. So front intake fans, for example, you can see set now in the list. I can now create a different profile and base that on a different sensor. So if I scroll down the list here, you'll see the 4070 Ti temperature number 1. We select that, that's the GPU temperature basically. We're now setting this as a GPU temp. So now what I'm doing is I'm telling the front fans in the case to spin up faster if the GPU gets hot. So this will then ramp those up. So you then set those on that specific set of intake fans that we've set up there. You might want to do this logically if you've got 3 fans across the bottom of your case as intake. You might want to do that as well so that they're blowing onto the graphics card more quickly if the GPU is getting hotter during a gaming session. So you can see you can mix and match these things. You can have the fans on the radiator respond to CPU temp, fans elsewhere respond to GPU temp, for example. Hopefully this has been helpful. Check out the links in the description to other related videos that you might find useful. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos. You might well find them interesting or useful. And most importantly, have a great life.